The air conditioning in the restaurant was always too cold, a sterile chill that usually made me shiver, but today, the heat inside me was a furnace, burning away the need for warmth. He sat across from me, same smug tilt to his head, same expensive watch catching the light, oblivious to the seismic shift happening beneath his feet. His words, delivered with a casual cruelty he'd perfected over years, landed not like bombs, but like tiny, precise shards of glass, embedding themselves deep. "She's moving in next week," he'd said, spearing a piece of salmon with a fork. "Finally get some space. She needs a proper home base. Tired of hotels." My breath hitched. Not because of the she I knew about her. Not because of the moving in I'd suspected that was coming eventually, though the speed was breathtaking. It was the where. He said it like it was obvious. Like it was his decision to make about our house. The house we had built, brick by brick, dream by dream, on a foundation I thought was solid rock but had turned out to be quicksand. He didn't look up. He didn't see the way my hands clenched under the table, the way the blood drained from my face, leaving my skin feeling thin and papery. He just kept eating, utterly self-satisfied, talking about how much easier things would be with her there, how they could finally settle into a routine. Routine. In my home. The home I had poured my life into. The cold air felt colder now, slicing through the rage that was boiling in my veins. Every detail of that house flashed behind my eyes, the worn spot on the living room floor where the dog used to sleep, the height marks we'd drawn on the kitchen doorframe for his kids, the rose bushes I'd planted by the front porch. And he was giving it away. Not giving it away, selling it, essentially, piece by piece, to someone else, someone he thought was better, brighter, newer. And he was using my walls, my roof, my foundation to do it. He took a sip of water, oblivious. "We'll need to clear out some of your junk, obviously. She travels light, but we'll need closet space. And she hates that floral armchair." The floral armchair. My grandmother's armchair. The one she'd sat in while teaching me to knit. The one I'd nursed babies in. The one I'd cried into after fights, after funerals, after bad days. Junk. A laugh bubbled up, dark and bitter, catching in my throat. It sounded like shattered glass. He finally looked up then, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "What's so funny?"
"Nothing," I wanted to say.
"Everything." But the furnace inside me was turning into something else. Something cold. Something sharp. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a terrifying clarity. He thought he had won. He thought he held all the cards. He thought the house was his to command, a trophy cabinet for his new life. He was wrong. And I suddenly knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, exactly how I was going to remind him just how wrong he was. The cold air felt good now, a sharp, clean edge against the heat of my resolve. He wanted space? He wanted a routine with her in my home? He wanted to throw out my past, my memories, my grandmother's armchair? He was about to get much, much more space than he ever bargained for. And the only routine he'd be settling into would be one of profound, blinding shock. Right now, you're dropping into my world at the moment everything changed. If you've ever felt blindsided, underestimated, or like the ground was giving way beneath you, maybe this resonates. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before him, before the sterile chill of the restaurant, before the salmon and the casual cruelty, there was just us. There was me. I lived a life built on quiet assumptions. The assumption that promises whispered in the dark held weight in the light. The assumption that a shared history, a shared mortgage, shared laughter and tears, forged an unbreakable bond. I was the woman who ironed his shirts just the way he liked them, who remembered the birthdays of his distant cousins, who kept the house running like a well-oiled, almost invisible machine. My world was painted in soft, muted colors. The comfortable beige of routine, the gentle pastels of domestic predictability, the warm golds of shared evenings. The house was the canvas for this life. Not just a structure, but a living, breathing entity. Its walls held the echoes of our conversations. Its floors bore the imprint of countless steps, My steps, his steps, the thundering steps of the dog, the tentative steps of children visiting. The garden was my sanctuary, a riot of color and scent that I coaxed from the earth with my own hands. Hydrangeas bloomed in impossible blues and purples, roses climbed the trellis like eager lovers, and herbs scented the air whenever the wind blew just right. It was a place of peace, a physical manifestation of the life I had chosen, the life I believed we were building together. My desires were simple, grounded. I wanted stability, quiet joy, the comfort of knowing where I belonged. I wanted the garden to flourish, the house to feel like a haven, the years to pass with shared stories and comfortable silence. I wasn't reaching for the stars. I was cultivating my own small patch of earth, believing it was enough, believing we were enough. I saw us growing old here, our steps slowing, the house aging gracefully with us, filled with the warmth of memory. I saw grandchildren one day playing in the yard, their laughter echoing off the same walls that had held my own tears. This was my vision. This was my quiet dream. He, I realized later, had a different dream. One that involved brighter, newer colors, faster speeds, more excitement. But I didn't see it then. Not truly. There were signs, I suppose, looking back. Late nights, hushed phone calls, a growing distance in his eyes. But I attributed it to stress, to work, to the general wear and tear of life. I was too busy tending the garden, polishing the furniture, keeping the machine running, to notice the subtle cracks spiderwebbing across the facade of my life. Then came the moment the facade shattered. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, not initially. It was colder, more clinical. A quiet admission over coffee, delivered with a sigh, as if it were a tiresome chore rather than a confession that would tear my world apart. He had met someone. It was serious. He wanted a divorce. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The familiar kitchen suddenly felt alien. The sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, seemed too bright, too cheerful for the gray landscape my heart had just become. I remember the way the steam rose from my coffee cup, blurring my vision, and the sudden, intense smell of the citrus-scented cleaner I'd used on the counter earlier that morning. It was a surreal, detached moment, like watching a scene unfold on a screen, the dialogue not quite syncing with the images. He talked about needing space, about finding himself, about how we had grown apart, all the clichés, delivered without originality or, it seemed, genuine remorse. He spoke about dividing assets, about lawyers, about the logistics of dismantling a life. But mostly he spoke about the house. He assumed, with a casual arrogance that still makes my stomach turn, that the house was his. His name was on the mortgage, after all. His career had paid for the bulk of it, or so he constantly reminded me. It was his primary asset. He would keep the house. I would get something else. Whatever the lawyers decided was fair. The fairness he envisioned, of course, involved me leaving with a fraction of what I'd invested, both financially and emotionally. He saw the house as a financial instrument, a line on a balance sheet, not the repository of my life's work and dreams. He spoke of selling it, or perhaps keeping it himself, settling me with a lump sum that felt insultingly small. His confidence was absolute. The house was his leverage, his power play, his symbol of having moved on and up. The shock of the affair, the divorce announcement, was a physical blow. It knocked the wind out of me, left me gasping for air in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. The pain was sharp, immediate, and pervasive. It settled in my chest, a crushing weight that made breathing difficult. Every corner of the house, every object, became a reminder of what was lost, what was being stolen. The garden, once a source of solace, now felt like a cruel joke, its vibrant life a stark contrast to the death of my marriage. Leaving the house was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It wasn't just packing boxes. It was packing away memories, sealing them up, knowing they would likely never be unpacked in that place again. Every photograph I took off the wall left a faint mark, a ghost limb of my former life. Every drawer I emptied felt like scooping out a piece of my soul. I didn't have much money saved. I hadn't needed much. My life was here, intertwined with his. He handled the finances, the bills, the big decisions. I managed the home, the heart of it. Now, without the heart, the structure felt hollow, a shell I could no longer inhabit. I found a small, soulless apartment in a complex filled with temporary people. The walls were thin, the light was harsh, and there was no garden, just a small concrete balcony overlooking a parking lot. It felt like a cage. The silence there was deafening, broken only by the sounds of my own grief and the muffled lives of strangers next door. I spent days wrapped in a blanket on a cheap sofa, staring at the blank walls, the world outside feeling distant and unreal. The woman who had nurtured hydrangeas and ironed shirts felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of beige anonymity. The first few weeks were a blur of raw emotion. Pain, confusion, betrayal. I replayed conversations in my head, searching for clues I'd missed, red flags I'd ignored. I felt like a fool, a naive, trusting fool who had built her entire world on a foundation of sand while believing it was rock. The humiliation was a constant companion, a hot flush that spread across my skin whenever I thought about his deceit, his casual dismissal of our shared life. He called occasionally, ostensibly to discuss logistics, but the calls were always laced with his new reality. He'd mention things about the house, things he was changing, things he was doing without me, things that emphasized his ownership, his control. He'd talk about meeting with the architect, an architect, to discuss renovations, plans he'd never mentioned when we were together. It was a deliberate way to rub salt in the wound, to highlight my exclusion, to show me just how quickly he was erasing me from the picture. He started mentioning her more openly, not by name at first, just hints. Someone was asking about the garden. I had helped sorting through the garage. He was laying the groundwork, slowly, deliberately. It was a psychological game, designed to diminish me further, to make me accept his new life, his new partner, his new claim on the house as a fait accompli. And it worked, to an extent. Each call left me feeling smaller, weaker, more defeated. I knew I needed legal help, but the prospect felt overwhelming. Lawyers cost money I didn't have. The legal jargon, the adversarial nature of divorce, felt alien and terrifying. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, barely functioning. It felt easier just to curl up and let the tide of his decisions wash over me. Let him take the house. Let him have his new life. Maybe the pain would eventually fade if I just stopped fighting.
But then came the restaurant,
The casual cruelty.
the boast.
The explicit mention of her moving into my home. It wasn't just about money or assets anymore.
It was about territory.
It was about a profound violation of everything I held sacred. It was about him not just taking the house, but defiling it, erasing my presence with hers. That moment in the cold restaurant wasn't just an inciting incident. It was a turning point. It was the precise instant the defeated woman on the sofa in the beige apartment died, and something else, something colder and harder, began to take shape. The pain didn't disappear, but it transmuted. It became fuel. The humiliation didn't vanish, but it hardened into resolve. The fear remained, but it was now overshadowed by a cold, quiet rage. His confidence, his absolute certainty that the house was his and his alone, was his greatest vulnerability. He saw it as a simple financial transaction, a property to be controlled. He didn't see the layers of history, the complex legal and emotional threads woven into its very structure. And, crucially, he didn't see me anymore. He saw a defeated ex-wife, easily managed, easily dismissed. He had made a critical error in his calculation. He had underestimated the quiet woman who tended the garden. He had mistaken my softness for weakness. That night, back in the sterile silence of the apartment, the cold rage kept me awake. I wasn't staring at blank walls anymore. I was seeing the house. Every room, every window, every angle. But I wasn't seeing it with longing or sadness. I was seeing it as a puzzle, a battlefield, a weapon. I remembered signing papers. Lots of papers. Mortgage documents, refinancing documents, insurance policies. He always handled the details, but I signed where he told me to sign. He made it seem complicated, boring, best left to him. He'd wave a hand, say, just sign here, standard stuff, and I, trusting, preoccupied with nurturing a home and family, would sign. But one detail pricked at me. A conversation years ago about restructuring the mortgage, maybe taking out equity for some investment he was keen on. I hadn't understood the specifics, didn't need to, he said. He handled it. But I remember the bank name, the type of loan maybe? Bits and pieces of conversations, filed away in the back of my mind, resurfaced now with a new, urgent significance. I started digging. It wasn't easy. He controlled most of the documents. Accessing old bank statements, mortgage records, felt like breaking into a fortress. But I remembered passwords, old email addresses, buried files on shared cloud storage he might have forgotten about. Late at night, fueled by bitter coffee and cold fury, I pieced together the financial history of that house. It was more complicated than I had imagined. His investments hadn't always panned out. There had been refinancing, consolidating debt, periods where money was tighter than he let on. He was a master of presenting a calm, successful facade. But the paper trail told a different story. A story of leveraging, of risk, of juggling multiple balls in the air. And the house, the beautiful, solid house I had loved, was one of the primary balls. The discovery wasn't a single aha moment. It was a slow, dawning realization, piecing together fragments of information like an archaeologist uncovering a buried city. Each document, each statement, added a layer to the picture. The picture wasn't of a secure asset, but of a highly leveraged property, burdened by a significant mortgage and potentially other liens he hadn't fully disclosed. Then I found it. A specific clause in a refinancing agreement from a few years back. Something about default. Something about acceleration clauses. Legalese that meant little to me on its own, but felt ominous, like a hidden fault line. This was the midpoint shift. It wasn't just about leaving, about surviving. It was about seeing the battlefield for what it truly was. He saw the house as a shield, a symbol of his power. I started to see it as a potential weapon, his greatest vulnerability. The coldness that had settled over me deepened. It wasn't just emotional detachment, it was strategic. I needed to think like him, but better. Colder. I knew I couldn't navigate this alone. The next day, I called the lawyer a friend had recommended. A family lawyer, known for being sharp and tenacious. I walked into her office feeling small and out of my depth, clutching a folder of disorganized papers that represented the messy, painful remnants of my life. Her office was surprisingly warm, filled with books and plants. She had kind eyes but a firm handshake. I sat across from her polished desk and, in a voice that trembled slightly at first, but grew stronger as I spoke, I told her everything. The marriage, the betrayal, the divorce, his arrogance, his plans for the house, his boast about the mistress. And then I showed her the papers I'd found. The mortgage details. The refinancing clause. She listened intently, asking clarifying questions, her pen occasionally scribbling notes on a pad. When I finished, the silence in the room felt different from the silence in my apartment. It wasn't empty, it was charged with possibility. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen lightly on the desk. So, he thinks he's keeping the house. He thinks it's his primary asset, his leverage. I nodded, my throat tight. He acts like it's already done. Like I have no say. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her kind eyes. It was a predator's smile. He's made a common mistake. He's focused on the equity, the value, the control. He hasn't focused on the liability. She picked up the papers I'd given her, her gaze tracing the lines of the refinancing agreement. This clause here. If certain conditions are met, missing payments, defaulting on other linked loans, sometimes even triggering events like a divorce filing depending on the terms, the entire remaining balance can become immediately due. It's called acceleration. My blood ran cold. And then hot. What does that mean? It means, she said, looking directly at me, her voice low and steady, If the lender accelerates the loan, they demand the full amount owed right now. If he can't pay it, and based on what you've shown me about his other ventures, it's unlikely he has that kind of liquid cash sitting around. The next step for the bank is foreclosure. Foreclosure. The word hung in the air, heavy and potent. It wasn't just a legal term. It felt like a force of nature. A storm gathering on the horizon. Foreclosure. I repeated, tasting the word. It felt wrong, destructive. This was the house I loved. Yes, she confirmed. The bank forces a sale of the property to recoup their money. Anyone living there, regardless of who they are or who claims ownership, has to leave. They are evicted. My mind reeled. Evicted. Him. Her. From my house. The house he thought was his castle, his prize. The coldness I'd felt in the restaurant, the strategic detachment, intensified. The warmth of her office, the kind eyes, faded into the background. All I saw was the house, and him, standing on its steps, inviting her in, erasing me. The idea of him being forcibly removed, of his arrogance being shattered by the very walls he claimed, was compelling. Brutally, terrifyingly compelling. How do we trigger that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She laid out the options, the legal steps. It wasn't simple. It required navigating complex financial structures, informing the bank of potential defaults, if they existed, using the legal process of the divorce to expose his true financial state and potentially trigger the acceleration clause if his finances were as precarious as the papers suggested. It was a risky strategy. It meant the house would be lost to both of us. The bank would take it. I wouldn't get my home back. But the goal had shifted. It wasn't about getting the house back anymore. It was about denying it to them.
It was about justice.
It was about retribution. It was about taking away the symbol of his betrayal and his perceived victory. The decision was agonizing. It meant consciously destroying something I loved, something I had built. It meant sacrificing the possibility, however slim, of ever reclaiming a part of my past. But the alternative, him living there with her, erasing me, celebrating his triumph within those walls, was unbearable. It felt like a slow, agonizing death of my spirit. This was the turning point. The fear of losing the house was still there, a knot in my stomach. But the cold, hard resolve was stronger. I looked at the lawyer, at her steady gaze, and I knew there was no going back. Do it, I said, the words firm, unwavering. File whatever we need to file. Tell them everything. My voice didn't tremble this time. It was cold and sharp, like glass. The legal process moved slowly, deliberately, like a glacier grinding rock. It required filings, disclosures, formal communications with his attorney, and most critically, with the mortgage lender. My lawyer was meticulous. She didn't just file papers. She built a case, piece by piece, using the financial documents I had painstakingly gathered. She highlighted the precariousness of his financial situation, the complex web of loans and leverage, and specifically, the clauses in the mortgage agreement that could be triggered by his actions, or even by the divorce process itself. He, meanwhile, seemed utterly unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. He was too busy parading his new life. He finished clearing out my junk, according to emails from his attorney. He sent me a terse note about donating my grandmother's armchair. He talked about paint colors and furniture deliveries. He seemed to genuinely believe that the divorce was a simple matter of asset division, and the house was firmly in his column. He had compartmentalized his life so completely, separating his messy financial dealings from the shiny new facade he was building with her, that he couldn't see how one was inextricably linked to the other. My lawyer cautioned me to remain silent, to give no indication of our strategy. Let him feel secure. Let him make assumptions. Let him build his new nest. The higher he built it, the harder he would fall. This was the deepening crisis. Not for me, not in the way he thought. My crisis was internal, a constant battle between the lingering ache for what was lost and the hardening resolve to see this through. The house, in my mind, was no longer a home, but a target. Every mention of it from him, every detail about the changes he was making, solidified my determination. He was making it easier for me in a way. He was turning the warm, familiar place into something alien, something I could bear to see destroyed.
He moved her in.
I heard it through the grapevine, through mutual acquaintances who, navigating the awkward social landscape of a divorce, offered hesitant updates. Saw him at the hardware store, buying paint. She was with him. Someone saw lights on in the study window late last night. Guess she's settling in. Each snippet of information was a small pinprick, a reminder of his invasion. He was succeeding. He was creating the life he wanted, in the place that had been the heart of mine. He was confident, arrogant. He was winning, and he knew it, or thought he knew it. The legal wheels continued to turn, slowly, inexorably. The communication with the bank became more formal. Notices were exchanged. The word default began to appear in official correspondence. My lawyer explained each step, her voice calm and steady, a counterpoint to the rising tension in my chest. We weren't actively causing the default, she explained. We were simply exposing the existing conditions that made it inevitable, given his financial state and the terms of the loan. We were pulling back the curtain, revealing the shaky foundations beneath his carefully constructed life. His attorney, initially dismissive of our inquiries regarding the mortgage, started to show signs of concern. There were more urgent emails, requests for clarification, attempts to delay or obfuscate. But the paper trail was clear. The terms were in black and white. The bank, alerted to the potential risks, began their own review. The tension during this period was almost unbearable. I was living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the inevitable to unfold. I imagined them in the house, his mistress rearranging furniture, her belongings filling the closets, her laughter echoing in the rooms where I had once cried. The thought was a constant, low-level thrum of pain, but it was necessary. It kept the cold resolve sharp. Then, the first official notice arrived at the house. Not addressed to me, of course. Addressed to him. A formal communication from the bank, referencing the loan, the potential default, the need for a significant payment or a plan to cure the delinquency. He called me furious. He accused me of interfering, of trying to sabotage him. He couldn't comprehend how I, the quiet woman who handled the garden, could possibly have unearthed his financial secrets and used them against him. He was still operating under the assumption of my naivete, my helplessness. "What have you done?" he roared into the phone. My lawyer had advised me on how to respond.
Calmly.
Factually. "I haven't done anything," I said, my voice flat. "I've just provided your lender with information about your financial situation, as is required during divorce proceedings. The terms of the loan are the terms of the loan. That's between you and the bank." He sputtered, unable to form a coherent argument. He was losing control, and he didn't understand why. He couldn't see the trap closing because he had never believed I was capable of setting it. The crisis deepened. He scrambled. I heard he was trying to secure emergency financing, calling in favors, looking for loopholes. He even tried to portray the bank's actions as harassment, blaming me entirely. His confidence didn't evaporate immediately. It curdled into desperate anger. He became more erratic, more aggressive. His lawyer sent threatening letters, accusing me of malicious intent. But malicious intent wasn't against the law. Exposing financial realities was not. The bank, driven by their own need to protect their assets, proceeded according to protocol. They issued formal notices of default. They set deadlines. And when the deadlines were missed, when he couldn't magic up the astronomical sum required to cure the accelerated loan, they initiated foreclosure proceedings.
It was real now.
Not just a strategy discussed in a lawyer's office, but a legal process with a clear, devastating outcome. The house was going to be taken, and everyone in it would have to leave. The final stage was set. The notice of foreclosure was delivered, along with a date for the for sale and, crucially, a date by which the property must be vacated. An eviction date. He still didn't seem to grasp the full magnitude of it until the end. Even as the date loomed, he was in denial. He insisted his lawyers would stop it, that he would find the money, that I couldn't possibly have done this to him. He was so consumed by his own narrative of being the wronged party The successful man betrayed by his bitter ex-wife, that he couldn't see the objective reality closing in. He thought I was trying to hurt him emotionally or financially in the divorce settlement. He never imagined I would use the very house he coveted as the instrument of his undoing. The days leading up to the eviction date were surreal. I wasn't in the house, of course. I was still in the beige apartment, waiting. The air felt thick with anticipation. I checked my phone constantly, reading dry legal updates from my lawyer, scanning local news feeds for any mention of property foreclosures in that area. Unlikely, I knew, but I couldn't help myself. Sleep was elusive, replaced by a nervous energy that crackled under my skin. I didn't wish him physical harm. I didn't wish her harm. But I wished for them to experience the abrupt, jarring displacement that I had felt. I wished for them to understand what it felt like to have the ground drop out from under you, to be told the place you thought was yours, the place you felt secure, was no longer a sanctuary, but a hostile territory you had to abandon. The day arrived. I didn't go to the house. My lawyer advised against it. There was no need for confrontation, no need for drama. The process would unfold according to legal procedure, enforced by law enforcement if necessary. Watching it, she said, would only inflict unnecessary pain, or perhaps give him the satisfaction of seeing my presence. But I couldn't stay completely away. I drove to the neighborhood. I parked on a street a few blocks over, a street where I wouldn't be seen but where I could potentially hear or maybe, just maybe, catch a glimpse from a distance. The air was crisp and cool, a perfect autumn day, completely indifferent to the human drama unfolding. My hands were shaking as I held the steering wheel. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if something went wrong? What if he had pulled a rabbit out of his hat? What if my carefully laid, brutal plan failed? I sat there, the quiet of the suburban street broken only by the distant sound of a leaf blower. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every passing car made me jump. Every distant siren sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Then I saw the vehicles turn onto a street 4 blocks away. 2 police cars, lights flashing but siren silent. An unmarked car, presumably the bank representative or the sheriff overseeing the eviction. They looked official, final. They pulled up to the curb in front of the house. My house. I couldn't see the front door clearly from my vantage point, but I could see the figures moving. The police officers approached the house. There was a pause. Then the door opened. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I held my breath. Figures emerged from the house. 2 figures. Him and her. They were talking to the officers on the porch. There was gesturing, disbelief, anger. From this distance, they looked small, like puppets in a play I had written. I couldn't hear their words, but their body language was loud and clear.
Shock.
Confusion. Utter, absolute blindsidedness. He paced on the porch, throwing his hands up in exasperation. She stood beside him, looking pale, her arms wrapped around herself, despite the mild weather. They argued with the officers, pointing to the door, shaking their heads. It was futile. The officers stood firm, their posture official, unwavering. Then the officers stepped aside, indicating something, the interior, maybe, or their cars. And slowly, reluctantly, he and she descended the porch steps. They walked towards one of the cars, escorted by an officer. It wasn't an arrest, not that I could tell. It was supervision, ensuring compliance. They were being removed, evicted, from the house he had boasted about, the house she was moving into, the house he thought was his impregnable fortress. The bank, the faceless, relentless entity of finance, had come for its due. And he, the man who prided himself on control, on financial acumen, had been stripped of his primary asset, his symbol of success, by a force he hadn't seen coming. He probably thought I had gone to the bank and fabricated some story. He likely couldn't grasp that I had simply found the truth buried in his own paperwork, the truth about the vulnerability he had hidden so carefully. He had been so busy building his new life on the surface that he hadn't paid attention to the rot in the foundation. They stood by the car for a few more minutes, supervised, collecting whatever minimal belongings they were allowed to take immediately. Then, they were ushered into a different car, not a police cruiser, but maybe the unmarked one. And they were driven away.
Just like that.
The police cars lingered for a moment, ensuring the house was secured. Then they too drove off. The street was quiet again. The house stood silent, empty. A foreclosure notice, I knew, would soon be affixed to the door. It was no longer his. It wasn't mine either. It belonged to the bank now, awaiting a forced sale, stripped of its history, its warmth, its life. A strange stillness settled over me. The furnace of rage had burned down to embers. The cold resolve began to thaw, leaving behind a complex mixture of feelings. There was victory, yes. A profound, almost overwhelming sense of vindication. He had tried to erase me, to replace me, to claim what was ours as solely his. And in his arrogance, he had lost everything. The poetic justice of it was undeniable. He lost the house not because of me, but because of his own financial missteps, his own hidden vulnerabilities, simply brought to light through the process he initiated, the divorce. I hadn't burned the house down. I had simply pointed out that it was already standing on a fault line, and his own weight triggered the quake. But beneath the satisfaction, there was a deep, aching sadness. The house was gone. The garden I had nurtured would wither without care. The walls that held so many memories would soon house strangers, or stand empty, waiting for the market to decide their fate. It was a Pyrrhic victory, in a way. I had won the battle for my dignity, for recognition that I was not a person to be discarded and replaced so easily, but the cost was high. I had lost my home, not just to him, but to the indifferent machinery of finance. I sat in the car for a long time, watching the silent house, the empty street. The air conditioning hummed softly, a sterile sound in the quiet. I thought about the floral armchair, standing alone in the emptied living room, waiting to be discarded. He thought he was discarding my past, my memories. But by forcing this outcome, he had inadvertently destroyed his own future, his own sense of security. He had underestimated the paper trail, the legal clauses, the quiet woman who finally decided she had nothing left to lose but her self-respect. The feeling wasn't triumph, not purely. It was something heavier, more complex. It was the quiet understanding that sometimes the most devastating power lies not in confrontation, but in cold, precise exposure. He had built his new life on a foundation of deceit and arrogance. I had simply filed the paperwork that revealed the rot. I started the car, the engine a low rumble breaking the silence. I drove away from the street, away from the house, leaving it to its fate. My own future stretched out before me, uncertain, but free from the weight of his betrayal. The beige apartment still awaited, but it felt different now. It wasn't a cage, it was a launching pad. I had lost a home, but I had reclaimed my strength. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still legal battles to fight, a life to rebuild from the ground up. But I carried with me a quiet certainty I hadn't possessed before. He had thought he was the one with power, with control. He had flaunted his new life, his new partner, in my face, believing I was helpless to stop him from taking what he wanted. He learned, the hard way, that sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who tend the garden and manage the details while the powerful man strides through the world, see more than he ever could. We see the cracks. We understand the foundations. And sometimes, when pushed too far, we know exactly which lever to pull to bring the whole dam structure down. The air outside the car was cool and clean. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs. The taste in my mouth was bittersweet, like dark chocolate and ashes. I had lost a home, but I had found something else. A resilience I hadn't known I possessed. A cold, quiet strength forged in the fire of betrayal. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt underestimated or found your strength in unexpected places, I'd love to hear your version, or just know you were here with me. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.